Hello, story listeners. Pat, storyteller here. In the fall, it's October. Here we go with a new story, and this one is extended. The reason is a few weeks ago, a writing contest had been held for a reading of a short story by LeVar Burton, that LeVar Burton of Star Trek fame and Reading Rainbow fame, in partnership with Faya magazine. They had welcomed writers to send in their short story. And I had written a short story based on Ray and his legacy trunk. I extended it because of the word count requirement for the competition. However, after having written the story and rereading the rules, it turns out that submissions were only being welcomed from U.S., United States regions and territories, and being in Canada, I was not able to legitimately submit the story. So having written it and edited and worked on it, it seemed like a good idea that since LeVar Burton couldn't read my short story, I would for my lovely readers, my lovely listeners. And so here we go with the extended version of Ray and his legacy trunk. Ray rubbed his hands together, then wiped them hastily down the sides of his trousers. He didn't care that his formal outfit was now marked with the residues of ashes and dirt. Even as extended family and friends dispersed, sobs still lingered in the air. Eventually, only Ray and his mother remained standing at the gravesite. The weather was pleasant enough, considering. It's not as if either of them had expected the day's weather to mirror their grief, after all. Instead, the weather gods got together and made the agreement to put a smile on the event. In her own way, Ray's grandmother was balanced about doling out cheerfulness, so, on reflection, this kind of weather on the day of farewell would suit how she would invite a gathering of family members. This was a woman who would always want to add some honey to her typical words of caution. She would probably have said about attending this her own funeral, "Respect and appreciate the day and take an umbrella, just in case." The umbrellas came in handy for Ray and his mother after all, because the longer they stood there reflecting on the life of the woman who had so influenced them both, the more intense grew the day's temperature. With no rain, the umbrellas could at least be hauled into duty for needed shade. Someday there would be a shade tree in full foliage for this spot, and not just a grave marker. At least that was the promise the mother and son made as they stood there. It wasn't until the steady stream of a light beam sliding low from side to side caught Ray's eyes that he realized how long they had been standing there. And even though the sun had long gone down, their umbrellas were still on duty. The groundskeeper, a Rastaman, approached them without so much as a sound. His presence was only preceded by his high beam flashlight. I regret to have to announce that the cemetery gate is closing for the night. I know it is hard for ones and ones to have to depart from the departed. The family can return in the light of day still. And so they did. The next day it rained. But no matter. Ray and his mother had umbrellas. Standing there in the rain, his mother finally pulled out from their silence. Ray, did Grandma ever tell you that she was a soldier? She was in the army, you know. Ray was surprised. That quiet old lady who baked the best potato pudding in the world was a soldier? Ray, the way soldiers are after a war, they keep practically everything to themselves. Look, her mother, my grandmother, was some type of army operative. My mother, your grandmother, followed in her footsteps. Your grandmother, her mother, gave her life to some war. My mother, your grandmother, went into the army to set it right. She swore she was going to go in and come out alive. That's as much as she would tell anyone about it. I only know from overhearing because she never directly told me. All I know of my grandmother is that she left a trunk that was to be for her grandchildren. And I, being the only one, I got that trunk. So many times I tried to flip that latch to look inside, but I just could not bring myself to do it. I was afraid to see skeletons within. We can stand here at this gravesite and remember my mother, your grandmother, but we have nowhere to find my grandmother, your great-grandmother. And no, I'm certain, yes, certain, she was not inside that trunk. Once, just once, in a dream, she told me so. She asked me then if I planned to be a soldier, and in the dream, I asked her if I should do this. She only smiled, but gave me no answer. When I told my mother, your grandmother, about this dream, she also smiled the same smile. It gave me chills. And when I asked her if I should become a soldier, she said, "The army has secrets," and left it at that. You won't remember this, Ray, but when we moved from the apartment, moved everything to go and live in grandmother's house, my family legacy trunk did not make it. Our entire crate was misplaced, and to this day, Ray's mother's voice trailed off. Then she continued, "The thing about my legacy trunk is I only feel the presence of it, like it is right here in my space when I remember that dream. Then I see the trunk and the latch out of the corner of my eye, like right now because I'm telling you about it. Perhaps it hadn't been a year and a day, but to Ray it felt as if they had been standing there that long. His arms began to feel the weight of holding up the umbrella. So despite the downpour, he lowered his arms. Ray was surprised by how much he enjoyed the gentle tap, tap, tap with each new streamer of rain on his now exposed arms, his shoulders, his head. His grandmother would have wanted him to be more careful. She might have said something like, "Mind you catch cold, Ray." Ray then reflected on the day his grandmother vested him with the legacy trunk that was to be his lifelong companion. Ray lives in Raytown, founded by a distant relative in that very valley. His mother lives in Raytown, and his grandmother lived in Raytown. And when Ray was old enough to understand all the words that the old people were saying, his grandmother came to him one day and said, "I have something to give you. I have a gift for you, Ray." She led him down the long hallway to the large walk-in closet next to her bedroom. Once inside, his grandmother pushed aside clothing preserved in zipped bags and dove further in. With a shuffling sound, she finally emerged, and into his tiny hands pushed forward a trunk, saying, "This is yours, Ray. This is yours forever, and it's filled with all kinds of long-time family things. You should always keep it with you. It will be for your life, Ray. Always have it. Always keep it with you. Take it everywhere." Ray loved his grandmother. He loved her and he believed in her love and kindness. And so he accepted this gift, this legacy trunk from his grandmother. Somehow, the trunk knew to follow Ray around, much like a new puppy would imprint and attach. And until the day after the funeral, the only other time Ray's mother mentioned this trunk was the day Ray complained to her about the endowment from his grandmother. What was his? 11 or 12 at that time? It was about the time he began to have some doubts about carting this legacy trunk around. He had confessed to his mother that he was feeling burdened by the family legacy trunk. Ray had placed that memory away behind school days and homework and soccer matches. But if he could summon the memory, it would be to recall her words at that time. "Yes, your grandmother's mother gave me a trunk to carry. So yes, it's in line for you to uphold your family legacy trunk, Ray." And so Ray would take the trunk with him to school, to his soccer matches, and hanging out with friends. He always had the trunk, and yet it never really came to his mind to look inside. He just accepted this gift from his grandmother, and it was always with him. There was Ray, and there was the trunk. There was the trunk, and there was Ray. And after Ray graduated from high school, he, along with the family, made the decision that he would go on to university. Well, the university was actually up the hill from Raytown, and so it was, as you might have guessed, a trek. Ray could get up the hill, but he had to carry the trunk with him because that was it for Ray and his family up to that day. Ray and the trunk and Ray. Anyway, it was a great celebration that he got accepted to the university on the hill. And on the first day when new students were going to the campus to get oriented, to have a look around, Ray too had to get there. His heart rate speeding up in anticipation, he started walking from Raytown, and of course, pulling the trunk behind him, sometimes pushing it in front of him, but always with him. And it had some weight. It was, after all, a trunk. And as he was edging the trunk up the hill, moving along with it, with sweat beading his brow, alongside the road, sitting under a tree very comfortably, was that Rasta man. And the Rasta man, seeing Ray, said to him, "Hey, what are you doing there, Ute man? How's the Ute man today?" Ray said, "I'm good, good." The Rasta man said, "You're Ray, yeah. I know the Ute man. I recognize the Ute man, the mother, the grandmother. Ray. It's quite a long time I haven't seen you or your mother at the cemetery." And Ray replied, Yep, yeah, that's me." And the Rasta man continued, "What are you doing, Ray, with that trunk? I see the brethren all the time with that trunk. What's the story?" You know, Ray is a sociable fellow. He's friendly with his Raytown peeps, and although he did not remember ever seeing that Rasta man, he took a moment to chat with him, and moreover to catch his breath, because the university campus was at the top of the hill, which had a 45-degree incline. Ray had done the calculations before deciding to agree on this particular university, but little did he understand the experience of the incline, the actual experience of the incline. Ray said, "Well, this is a gift from my grandmother, and this is just me and my trunk everywhere. It's my family legacy." And the Rasta man said, "But Ute man, what's in the trunk though?" And for a moment, Ray was flabbergasted. He paused and said, "In the trunk?" Rastaman said, "Yeah, I can see it is heavy. It looks very heavy. So I must question what's in said trunk. What's making it so heavy?" And because Ray was a bit tired from pushing and pulling the trunk up the 45-degree hill, he paused some more. Well, I never thought to look in the trunk." Rastaman said, "How many years have you had the trunk, Ray?" Ray thought and thought before saying, "Maybe, I don't know, since I was about 3 years old, something like that." Rastaman raised an eyebrow. "And you never thought to look in the trunk?" Ray replied, "No, I just love my grandmother and she gave it to me as a gift, and she told me to always keep it with me, so that's what I've been doing." Rastaman said, "Ray, when the Ute man goes to university, Ute man has to practice thinking about questions and asking questions. Right now is a good time to just, But wait, the Ute man looks a little tired. Ute man, take a seat. Take a sit. Let I take a look inside that trunk. since you never until now asked yourself what's inside. Something about looking ahead to traveling up that 45-degree hill every day with that family legacy trunk in tow brought Ray to a halt. There was a rumble of thunder overhead, just as Ray said softly, "Yeah, why not? I could use a minute to rest." Even so, a bit nervously, Ray flipped the latch to begin to open the trunk. The hinges creaked the way they would from long years of not being opened until this day. And inside the trunk, piles of notepaper. This was puzzling because even though they were just pieces of paper in there, the trunk was surely weighty. Ray picked up one of the notes and started to read it aloud. That first note said, "Don't try that. It's not going to work." Ray looked at the note and thought, well, who's that written to? It doesn't have a name on it. Rastaman said, "Youth, you're on your way up the hill to university with a legacy message that says don't try that, it's not going to work. Youth man needs to work. I reason the youth man will need to toss out that note. It's just a piece of paper, but it has weight. Youth man has to right now lighten that load. Seen?" Now, there was a garbage bin nearby, and Ray, being a conscientious young man, crumpled that note up and placed it in the bin. It was only a piece of paper, but it plummeted into the bin with the heaviness of a rock. Then Ray looked skyward, and just as a second low decibel rumbling of thunder rolled in and lined up precisely with the nervous beat of his young heart, Ray went back and looked again in the trunk. There were all kinds of notes in there. There was one that said, "Don't lend your money to people. They're not going to pay you back." Rastaman said, "Youth man ever lent money to people?" Ray replied, "Well, not really. If somebody needs something, I give what I can. I don't really expect it back. Sometimes a person gives it back. Sometimes another person doesn't. I mean, all the same to me. Nice if they give it back, but I don't give it to get it back." Rastaman said, "Then the youth man doesn't need that note of guidance on the lending and borrow front. Seen? Why the youth man doesn't just put that in said bin?" Ray paused again, then said, "Yes, that one, too, landed like a stone in the bin." Ray looked at one more note. It said, "Don't tell secrets to people. People will hurt you if you would tell your secrets." Rastaman said, "The youth man ever tell secrets?" Ray said, "You know, to tell the truth, I don't have any secrets. If I have a problem, I talk to my mother or I talk to a friend. I don't really keep secrets." Rastaman said, "Maybe the youth man doesn't need that burden then, since keeping secrets is not a practice that the youth man follows." So Ray threw it out along with the others. It was becoming easier now. On and on it went. with all the notes saying things that were helpful or not helpful, or not even belonging in this time frame of first day university orientation. Eventually, there was one last note in the bottom of the trunk, and it said, "Always listen to your grandmother." And the Rastaman said, "Well, Ute, what's the record on always listening to Grandma?" And Ray said, "Sometimes, but mostly I listened to her about this trunk." And the Rastaman said, "But it's a heavy trunk, and the Ute man is just pulling it around with things never used or elsewise not needed." When the Rastaman said that, Ray practically fell over on the trunk. Always listen to your grandmother. Ray reflected on this one too. "Well, maybe not always," Ray said to the Rastaman. "So, going to keep that note, considering the Ute man only did the listening sometimes? Works for the Ute man sometimes, works for the Ute man not sometimes?" Ray was a little nervous, He had thrown out so many things in what seemed like no time at all. Was it a few minutes, or had it been hours on that thundery weekday afternoon? But the trunk had been heavy, and he needed to get up the hill to the university as the day was carrying on. But he thought, "I'm going to leave this one in here." So he closed the trunk, and it was much, much lighter. He could practically move it with one finger up the hill. Then, suddenly, there was a burst of wind. It threw the lid of the trunk open, and the one piece of paper that was left in the trunk flew out and up into the air. Ray reached for it, the one note that was a feather and not a stone. But it was gone. The trunk, too, became feather light. The wind wrapped arms around it and took it up into the air and carried it off. And then Ray was standing there with no trunk, trunkless, stunned. It was almost as if he forgot his name because it had been pasted onto the lid of the now disappeared trunk. He looked back, and there was the Rastaman pointing to the heavens. Rastaman said, "Blessings and guidance, Ray. Every step upward is in order, and I consider your climb will yield a new focus now." Ray looked upward, then back again. The notes were gone. The trunk was gone. The weight was gone. The bin was gone. The Rastaman was gone. And Ray paused again. Then, with a wind coming in, that cleared the sweat from his brow, Ray from Raytown kept on stepping up, up, up the hill to see what lay ahead. Orientation day for his future now without the weight of the family legacy trunk, but in his hand a new blank notepad. The end. I hope you enjoyed the extended story of Ray and his family legacy trunk.